Peter is actually one of the best entrepreneurs that I've had the chance to meet. Peter is not only the founder and executive chairman of XPRIZE Foundation, but also the Singularity Foundation. He is an entrepreneur, has created more than 20 companies in the areas of longevity, space, and different ventures. And he's a best-selling author of a few books, both Abundance and The Future is Faster Than You Think. Peter has been named by Fortune magazine as one of the top 50 global leaders. Peter, welcome.
Thank you, Amir. It's a pleasure to be joining you, and thank you to the ITU. Thank you to XPRIZE for hosting this today. So, if I may, I'll go ahead and jump in.
Absolutely, Peter. Welcome.
Great. So, first of all, I just wanted to say hello to everybody globally around the world. It's one of the things that the COVID-19 pandemic has done is it's made the world a lot smaller with instant transportation in the way and fashion that we sort of imagined the future would be, but I expect it to be teleporting, not necessarily zooming. So let me jump in and talk about a few different subjects, especially during this time when the world is being hit by negative news around the pandemic, around social unrest, around political unrest. It's kind of difficult to put ourselves in the proper mindset. And I think one of the most extraordinary mindsets that we can have, one of the most extraordinary mindsets that we need to have, is one that says there is no problem that can't be solved. And it's something that I've focused on and honed. One of the things that I am always talking to entrepreneurs about, those that I invest in, those that I mentor, those that I support, is ultimately your mindset is the single most important thing that you have as an asset. It isn't your capital. It isn't your technology, it's your mindset. And I bet if you went to the best entrepreneurs on the planet, from a Larry Page, a Jeff Bezos, and Elon Musk, a Steve Jobs, whomever it was, and you took away all their capital, all of their technology, and left them just with their mindset, the majority of them would regain the majority of what they lost, because your mindset focuses what you do, the decisions you make, how you filter details, the enthusiasm, the passion with which you go after your objectives. And so ultimately, the question is for each of us, what mindsets do we want to have? And a lot of people, myself included over the years, we happen into mindsets. We stumble into them. We don't actively say, this is the mindset I want to create and the mindset I'm going to go and pursue. And I think it's more important than ever that we do that. And so I spend a lot of my time focusing with communities that I mentor and Abundance 360 and such, talking about 6 different mindsets. The first is an abundance mindset, and will be the focus mostly what I speak to. The notion that there is nothing truly scarce, that you can turn anything from scarcity to abundance with the application of technology. I'll come back to that. The second is an exponential mindset. The notion is our brains are wired in a linear fashion, but the world around us, the world that you're working on, helping to build, create, is moving exponentially. In other words, 10 linear steps, you're 10 meters away, 10 exponential steps, you're 1,000 meters away. The next is a longevity mindset. And I focus a lot on this in the work that I do, the companies I build, the investments I make, that we're in a position where we're going to be able to add 10, 20, 30 healthy years on a person's lifespan. And understanding and believing that is a fundamental step in getting there. Then a purpose-driven mindset. What is your purpose in life? What do you wake up every morning with and say, I'm super psyched, I'm excited to jump out of bed to go work on this? And within the canvas of that purpose-driven mindset, what I call your massively transformative purpose, what are the moonshots you're taking? Most of the world is trying to stay even and not drift backwards. Some are trying to make a 10% increase. But rather than 10%, what if you had the mindset, no, I'm going 10x, I'm going to go 1,000%. Well, that's a moonshot mindset. And then finally, a gratitude mindset, which I think is one of the most important things we can have today more than ever before, to be grateful for the things that we have and grateful for the purpose, the mission, capabilities, the tools we have to solve problems. So let me dive a little bit into the abundance mindset and begin with this notion. I fundamentally believe there is no problem we cannot solve. And we as humans evolved in a very different world. And the 100 billion neurons in our brain, 100 trillion synaptic connections that make up everything we see, fear, hear, feel, all of those are evolved. Our brains evolved from hundreds of thousands and millions of years ago, back when the world was local, linear, and scarce. But today, my question is, what do you truly think is scarce? Because I think if you objectively look at it, we have the ability to turn scarcity into abundance. And one of the primary forces that is going to enable us to do that is artificial intelligence. It is all of the exponential technologies riding on top of computation, but AI is for sure one of the principal areas. Let me dive down and convince you, if you would, with examples. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food, water, energy, healthcare, education, knowledge, all of these things, I would posit that most all of these things have gone from scarcity to abundance, or at least the potential for abundance as a result of exponentials, right? So the biggest change that we've seen in society has been, in fact, the notion that we are, communications are now massively abundant, that there are more of these devices in the world than there are human beings, and you have access to communication tech that would have made the presidents of most countries jealous just 30 years ago. Just 30 years ago, within most of our lifetimes. And riding on top of these devices is information abundance and potentially knowledge abundance. And so that, the child with a cell phone in the middle of Detroit, the Bronx, or, Dubai, or, Colombo, Sri Lanka, whatever it might be, that child has access to the same information, the same knowledge, if you would, that Larry Page, the founder, and Sergey Brin, the founders of Google, had. It isn't that, Larry and Sergey's access to Google searches is a little bit better or a lot better. It's the same. And so this massive democratization and demonetization effort going on for communications and for knowledge is leveling the playing field. So let's tick those off. Now, one of the areas that XPRIZE has worked on, they're very proud of the work that Amir and Anusha and the whole team have done, is solving and knocking down grand challenge after grand challenge. And one of them, for example, is water. We talk about water wars and water scarcity. We live on a planet that is 2/3 water. It's a blue-green planet, but yet 97% of the Earth's surface, 97% of the water on Earth is salt water. 2% is ice, and we fight over 0.5% in our river and our lakes. But one of the X prizes we had, the Water Abundance X Prize, said, hold it, 1 second. There's plenty of water distributed globally in the atmosphere. There's quadrillions of liters of water in the atmosphere. And we have the potential to extract that water any place on the planet. And so just a mindset shift that says, oh, okay, I can understand how technology can go from water scarcity to water abundance using atmospheric or biospheric extraction technologies that level a playing field. In food, we're getting ready to launch a food X Prize that is fundamentally going to look at, rather than trying to grow more cows, chicken, tuna on the planet as the level of people move out of poverty into middle class and desire higher levels of protein, instead of just trying to shift more of our global ecosystem to livestock, why don't we learn how to grow food in a very different way, where it's cellular agriculture, where the food we are able to grow is healthier, tastes better, is lower cost, and is far more available than the food we currently get. Housing, technologies around 3D printing of housing. Anyway, there's lots of different areas, but the two biggest areas that I am super excited to go from scarcity to abundance, and where AI plays the biggest role that I can possibly imagine, is in healthcare and education. And, you know, on the healthcare side, there's an old adage that I love, which is, you know, the woman or man who has their health has 1,000 dreams, and the person who does not has but one. There's nothing more important than our health. And, you know, it's sad that, you know, disease does not discriminate, and neither should health and healthcare. And the problem is today we don't have healthcare. We have sick care. We have systems around the world that only take care of you after you're sick. And we have the potential to completely transform true healthcare, which is going to be a function of a number of exponentials that are converging. It's going to be sensors, consumables, wearables, as Daniel Kraft likes to joke, under wearables. You know, I'm wearing my Apple Watch. I've got my Aura Ring. I've got a small RFID chip that someday will measure, you know, blood glucose or mRNA in my bloodstreams, whatever the case might be. You know, most of us know so little about our health. We maybe go to a doctor once a year for an annual checkup, but that's not enough. Your ability to understand when anything is breaking down, and then being able to fix it, or cure it, or make an intervention. So healthcare is going to become a continuous passive process where the sensors on my body, the networks, the AI software shell around me is ultimately going to become my healthcare provider, you know, making me the CEO of my own health to make the decisions I want. And we're going to move, you know, the interventions of healthcare from the doctor's office and from the hospital. By the way, the hospital is the most dangerous place to be. We're going to move it from there into your bedroom, into your office, onto your person, where you're continuously being monitored. And all of these things are being enabled by AI, right? AIs that are scanning your skin while you're in the shower, looking for any kind of cancers or moles that could be a melanoma or any kind of a carcinoma, to AIs that are using brand new technologies that can scan your body, right? One of the companies I love is a woman run by a woman named Dr. Mary Lou Jepson, who's the CEO of Open Water, and she's building technology using red laser light holography and echo that can basically image your body with technology as good or better than MRIs, but 1,000 times smaller and 1,000 times cheaper. And the goal there is find any kind of a cancer at the very beginning. We're at the verge of liquid biopsies from companies like Grail and Freenome that will be able to find any kind of cancers at the beginning, so that ultimately you're able to catch disease at stage 0, at stage 1, where it is ultimately curable. And these technologies are democratizable, right? These are technologies which can be in a village in any country around the world, especially as we hit on the next of the abundance trajectories, which is communications. You know, in 2017, we had about 3.8 billion people connected on the planet. Pretty good, but in the next 5 years, we have the potential to connect every single human on planet Earth. And of course, this community knows that, especially in partnership with the ITU, as 5G begins to cover the planet like kudzu, and as we begin to launch Starlink and Kuiper and a multitude of other satellite-based platforms, we have the ability to provide, you know, multi-tens or hundreds of megabit connection speeds to the Gobi Desert or the Himalayas, let alone downtown cities around the planet. And providing that level of connectivity enables something that's extraordinary, which is the ability to truly revolutionize education. So today, educational systems around the world are still Baroque and Baroquan. There's still the sage on the stage with, you know, frankly, half the kids are lost, half the kids are bored. And it's time we change that. It's time that we make education, you know, passion driven, where the child is able to follow their investigations. It's more like the Young Ladies Illustrated primer from Neil Stephenson's work, right? Ultimately, it's the combination of AI, sensors, augmented virtual reality, that allows a child who wants to learn about ancient Greece, rather than reading about it in a textbook or watching a 2D video, to immerse themselves in ancient Greece and have a conversation with some guy in a white toga on a slab of marble who comes over as an AI avatar and introduces themselves as Plato and says, hey, what are you up to? Let's go chat. Let me show you around, Athens. And you have an immersive experience that you remember, because we remember emotional and physical experiences versus a line from a book. And so these are democratizing capabilities that will uplift education globally around the world and provide an educational experience to the one versus, that individual child who learns at their language skill with the examples of their favorite sports star or movie star or culturally appropriate, and moves them from where they are to where they need to go. So you solve education, you solve healthcare, you solve water, you solve food and housing. And we're heading towards a world which is truly the world that I work towards. It's the work that I do with the XPRIZE Foundation through this incredible team of leaders that we built under Anusha, work that we do at Singularity University, work that I do in Abundance 360. We can create a world of abundance. We can create a world that meets the needs of every man, woman, and child. Not a matter of if we can do it. It's a matter of when we will do it. And it is, the principles and thoughts around AI for good that are this democratizing force that democratizes and pushes all of these things forward. So, ultimately, one of the things that's critically important is the notion that, all of these tools, computation, quantum computing that's coming online, AI, sensors, networks, 3D printing, synthetic biology, augmented virtual reality, all of these are tools. And they're tools that only get put to good use and only get effectively enabled when they're employed by a person who's got a purpose and a passion. And in particular, what I and Amir talk about is really communities of problem solvers. How do we enable communities to step up and say, this problem, I'm done with it. I refuse to let this go on. There is a solution, and we're going to use these exponential tools to demonstrate and pilot that solution. And it comes down to the individual. It comes down to the small team that says, I don't care what the government's doing. I don't care what companies are doing. I'm going to focus on solving this problem. This is my massively transformative purpose, and this is my moonshot. And, small groups can change the world. And as the old adage says, it's the only thing that often does. So ultimately, what are you going to focus on? What are you as an individual going to focus on solving? Who are you going to bring together to form a team of problem solvers? As I like to talk about within XPRIZE and SU is, the world's biggest problems are the world's biggest business opportunities. If you're an entrepreneur is someone who finds a juicy problem and solves it. And that's my massively transformative purpose, is to inspire and guide entrepreneurs to create a hopeful, compelling, and abundant future for humanity. So that's what I love to do through XPRIZE and then through Singularity, is find entrepreneurs and support their missions, inspire them, guide them. Because ultimately, more entrepreneurs picking and choosing problems and solving them is what makes the world great. It's what solves and slays problem after problem. I want to save a few minutes for Q&A, and so let me take a moment and close on one last subject. So, I'm so proud. It's hard to believe that the XPRIZE is 25 years old, about 15 years since the Ansari XPRIZE got won. And the question is, where are we going? And I counsel all of the companies I invest in and everybody I talk to that if you're coming through COVID-19 unchanged as a business or as a business model, you've missed the point. If you're just trying to do business as usual, then you've missed a massive opportunity, because this pandemic is a chance for people to pivot, to become more exponential, more agile. And one of the areas that XPRIZE is pivoting towards is something we talk about called global visioneering. And here's a vision. We're not there yet. We're at the beginning of this. But one of the challenges is that the human race is fundamentally, let me just change that. Our minds, the human mind, is fundamentally unable to grasp true existential threats. We don't. We can grasp a threat of a lion or a tiger, or being in an earthquake, something that's affecting us in that moment right now. But existential threats that even when there's true scientific data, we have a hard time as a society grasping that, right? COVID-19 is a perfect example. These types of pandemics have been foretold, been warned against, but yet we do nothing. There are many other existential threats. There are threats that either government or large industries or philanthropists are not properly taking on. One example is asteroid impacts, right? Even a small asteroid impact on the planet's surface will make COVID-19 look like a sunny day in Santa Monica. If any of you have seen the television show Social, or the documentaries came out, Social Dilemma, is that an existential threat? Perhaps. Many do believe it. I was very swayed by that. Obviously, the environment and species extinction, all of these are existential threats. Massive social unrest. So the question is, how do we deal with this if they're not being taken on head on? And so one of the things that XPRIZE is looking at is creating a mechanism where every year a slew of experts from around the world help tee up 100 huge problems that are not being properly addressed, either by anybody or not sufficient to move the program. So one of them, for example, forest fires. I live here in Southern California. This can be made a thing of the past. We've designed an XPRIZE for wildfires that I think is an amazing XPRIZE to put an end to these fires just popping up out of no place. And anyway, put that aside. And so imagine 100 of these threats that we every year curate, and then we narrow it down to the top 10. What are those threats that are the most important, that are the most prizable, and that are the most near-term urgent, that we believe are solvable, and then create the designs around prizes for those top 10, create the compelling data, and then going out to the world and asking the world, hey, here are 10 existential threats. First of all, you should know about them. You should educate about them. This is conversations with your politicians, conversations with your family at the dinner table. And which is the most important that we should focus on this year? And then have the world vote. Have 100 million people around the planet vote on what they consider the most important problem they want solved that year, and then launch that XPRIZE 2 weeks later, and then follow it and have 100 million people, a couple 100 million people follow that competition as it attacks and solves that problem. And then the next year, wash, rinse, repeat, right? In other words, do it once again, and have this engine of raising them up, the most important problems that the world needs to know about, and at least knocking down one of them. And with the right, budgets and philanthropy, the challenge is there's so much more that could be done. And I don't see enough philanthropists. I don't see enough governments. I don't see enough companies actually solving those problems. I don't know what they plan to do with their money after they're dead, but I can tell you they can solve these problems. These are problems. There is no problem that cannot be solved. All right, I'm going to leave it at that. Amir, take it back to you.
Peter, wonderful to have you give us this not only positive but accelerated perspective, because as we try to understand what problems to be solved, you give us a framework, one to shortcut the problems and leapfrog to a future where we can see ourselves being in better harmony and better life, and also minimize the problems that are today that are still real. What I gather from your talk is that you're inviting all of us to be engineers of change, not on just
Love that.
observing problems, but being an actor of this change and engineering that. You did notice that we are very focused on collaboration and cooperation and solving problems together. We don't have time for questions, but are you able to tell us how should we look at AI for good or changing problems in the world through the lens of abundance? How should we have a mindset to penetrate these problems by thinking wide and large and having enough stamina and energy to go through the difficult times of solving those problems?
Yeah, so thank you, Amir. And listen, I want to give people a framework that I think about things. Can we create a world in which the needs of every man, woman, and child are being met? Not the extravagant needs of I want a Ferrari, but the needs where every child born today has access to the best available healthcare, because it's completely digitized, demonetized, dematerialized, democratized. I think the answer is yes. It's ultimately going to be AI and robotics, and robotic costs can be demonetized significantly. The best diagnosticians are going to be AIs. It's going to be malpractice soon to do a diagnosis without having an AI in the loop. And that is something which is completely demonetizable. Can every child have access to the best education that is important and relative to them and their culture? I think definitively yes. And again, that's over the global communications network we're building and AI and other imaging technologies, but we can get there. Can we put a roof over people's heads? Can we give them clean water? Can we provide food far cheaper, distributed? Half the food costs of the meal you're going to eat today is travel miles, because your different products come from a different world. But what if you can manufacture those locally in vertical farms or in cellular farms? These are things that can provide healthier local food that becomes, again, demonetized. And for me, the lens of AI for good is simply this: how do we provide every man, woman, and child the things that they need? And people talk about the widening wealth gap, and there is a widening wealth gap. And I don't want to, but I want to give you a different frame for that. For most of all history, it was the pharaoh, the king and the queen, the emperor on the hilltop, and the rest of society, 99.999% in squalor, supporting the needs of those few at the very top. And that was society for much of the planet. And it was the few haves and the massive have-nots. And we're moving, as people move out of poverty, and I look at the charts every year, people moving out of abject poverty towards middle class. It gets better every year. And it's not because we've gotten smarter, have better politicians. It's a function of technology turning scarcity into abundance. But ultimately, our goal is to go from a few haves and the majority have-nots to everybody being haves. And yes, there'll be some at the very top who are super haves, and that's okay. But can we create a world where every mother knows that their children has access to their needs? And then is that world a better world? And I definitively think it is. I think it's going to be a more peaceful world. And I think that's the world, at least that within the XPRIZE and within the AI for good, that we're striving towards. So I hope that is a useful lens. I think, ultimately, if a mother knows that, and I look at child mortality rates plummeting, halving again over the last decade as one of the most important measures, right? And if a mother knows that, okay, my child is going to have food, water, a roof, healthcare, education, communications, access to entertainment, all of those things, maybe not too much entertainment, as my 9-year-olds are on their tablets way too much. But that's the world we should be aiming for, and AI is the great enabler for that.